Okay, so my name is Tenzin Dawa, and I'm currently working as a researcher at the Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Democracy. So at the center, we work on monitoring and document and research on human rights situation inside Tibet, with the mission to protect the human rights of Tibetans inside Tibet and promote the principles of democracy in the exiled Tibetan community. So, as a research based organization, we regularly get reports and updates on Tibetans getting sentenced and arrested for various reasons. So, we have individual sources inside Tibet and outside Tibet who give us information. But as a research organization, we make sure that the information that we receive is verified because we believe in credible reporting. So we always make sure that whatever the information that we received are verified. So we do have a lot of individual sources who are based inside Tibet and outside Tibet. And then on the other hand, we also get updates from the Tibetan news media outlets in outside Tibet, because in Tibet it's impossible for Tibetan news medias to exist inside Tibet. So in the year 2017, TCHRD's political prisoner database have recorded 18 known Tibetan political prisoners who have been arrested and arbitrarily detained, and some are even sentenced in the year 2017. But then TCHRD's political prisoner database, starting since 1991 to this date, we have recorded more than 5,000 known Tibetan political prisoners recorded in the database. So it's a known fact that every year many Tibetans get arrested and detained for simply sharing out an information of an incident that took place in Tibet, and it's a routine practice from the side of the Chinese authorities to arbitrarily arrest Tibetans and convict them on charges of very vague and broad and sometimes fabricated charges of leaking state secrets and inciting separatism and endangering state stability. So under these charges, many Tibetans have been sentenced to long prison terms. So to give out names of each individual is difficult because there are hundreds of them. But if I give an example, in April 2018, a 23-year-old monk Lobsang Sonam was actually sentenced to 6 years in prison for sharing out an information and an image of an event that took place inside Tibet. So these sort of instances can speak the magnitude of the severity of restrictions on the communication of Tibetans inside Tibet and to those living outside Tibet. Okay, so to speak about United Nations, I mean, United Nations itself is a very broad and a very big institution itself. It has its own, General Assembly. It has its own human rights bodies and treaty bodies. So if I give examples and instances from the past, you can see that in the past, General Assembly has indeed passed out resolutions raising concerns of human rights situation inside Tibet. For instance, we have had the 1991 resolution that was passed out by the UN General Assembly, and followed by 1965, and then we have a resolution passed by this United Nations Subcommittee on the Minority Issues, again highlighting the concerns raised by Tibetans who are being denied their basic human rights inside Tibet. And then on the other hand, we have the UN human rights officers. So for instance, the former UN human rights chief like Navi Pillai and former UN human rights chief officer Zaid Al-Hassan have been quite vocal about the fact that Tibetans fundamental human rights inside Tibet are being violated by Chinese authorities. So they have been quite outspoken at the UN platform in raising their concerns on the Tibetans, the situation of Tibetans inside Tibet. And besides that, we also have the UN human rights bodies that we as civil society, members of civil society, regularly engage with. So we have special rapporteurs that we send and submit cases of Tibetans who have been, arbitrarily arrested and then who gets sentenced to long prison terms for simply exercising their human rights. So we engage with the special rapporteurs, and they have been very helpful in communicating with China to make sure that China is held to account of its human rights record. But it also, on the other hand, it is also, I think people should know the fact that there are a number of challenges that the UN institution itself nowadays is facing, because China is, of course, with its growing international influence, has consistently and quite aggressively sometimes worked hard to silence criticism of its human rights record in front of the UN bodies. And then they have also worked hard to weaken the UN mechanisms. So yeah, it's something that I think is something that people of the world and the international community should be concerned about and should raise these concerns. So TCHRD, as a research organization, we regularly publish a lot of thematic reports and annual reports highlighting the human rights situation inside Tibet. And we have been, since the organizations started working, we have been advocating for the human rights of Tibet inside Tibet to the international community. And I think we have made significant contribution to the Tibetan cause by highlighting the human rights of Tibetans inside Tibet so that will serve the broader cause of the Tibetan issue. And then our research reports that we produce have been extensively used by the regional advocacy and international advocacy groups to carry out campaigns. So that way, I think we have made quite a good, significant contribution to the Tibetan cause. I don't think so, because ever since the current Chinese president Xi Jinping came to power, we see this very discriminatory and cultural assimilationist policies that are being implemented inside Tibet, which is why we see hundreds of Tibetans getting arrested for simply exercising their human rights and asserting their cultural identity. So they are being criminalized for the very identity of the Tibetans. And then we see that the mass surveillance, the Orwellian sort of mass surveillance, has become omnipresent in the Tibetan areas, which is why Tibetans nowadays have to basically self-censor their opinion before they express themselves, because their expression might, jeopardize the life of their family members back inside Tibet. So this way, the Chinese government have been systematic in its efforts to attack the very identity of Tibetan culture, and also the fact that Tibetans nowadays inside Tibet are not able to exercise their religious freedom. We see that the monasteries are being extensively controlled by the Chinese Communist Party members, and we see that monasteries are heavily deployed with security personnel, and kids as young as kindergarten children are, basically banned from attending religious activities during their summer holidays. So these sort of restrictions that are imposed inside Tibet is, and also the fact that we see self-immolation still to this day, and self-immolation is symptomatic of the fact that Tibetans do not have the safe space to address their grievances, and that they are being denied their fundamental human rights. So these sort of incidents speaks, again, that the Tibetans inside Tibet are not happy and the policies that are being implemented by the Chinese authorities are not working for them. Again, we all know that China is indeed a very powerful nation, but however, you have to deal with them the way you deal with a bully. Like, you have to stand to them and not, capitulate to their economic power. So again, for the Tibetans, for the young Tibetans specifically, they might feel that the current activism that they're involved in is not making any difference and is not bringing an immediate solution to the Tibet issue. But I think it's important to know and understand that these activisms that we are currently doing will, in the long run, have the potential to lead to a good solution to the Tibet issue. So I think we just have to keep the fight going and not lose our hope.